The border between Belarus and Poland is more significant than most in this part of the world, and the two countries have, of course, a long shared and at times unhappy history. I don't need to outline history from the Grand Duchy to the present, including the Belarusian community in East Poland, but it's worth mentioning this region, known in Polish as Kresy, is treated by Poles, sometimes scornfully, but also with a degree of sentimental affection as a romantic frontier region of their country, for example, by Czesław Miłosz. I think I'll get the spectacles that I can actually see through, if you don't mind. 2 seconds. "30 seconds gone. Okay. In May 2004, a big milestone was when Poland became part of the EU and potentially a gateway to it. In Belarus, this event was treated with real suspicion by the authorities, as well as many simple people who followed the official line. Soon after Poland had joined the EU, nearing the head of a queue in a Minsk post office, I heard the woman in front trying to send something to Poland, when a voice rang out from behind me, "Don't serve her, she's in touch with the enemy." Few writers hold out hopes of riches from their neighbour, unlike a character singing a ditty in Halina Bogdanova's play A.S. Linia. "Mój milionok zjeździł Polsku, a tu dolary привез. Теперь он спокушает, он сусідских кур и коз." My paper is concerned with young Belarusian poets and writers, for some of whose imaginations this border became alive in various ways. For some as a place of romance and mystery, for some as an escape. For a far fuller examination of the relationship between Poland and Belarus, I recommend the excellent work of Nelly Bekus. Belarus has often been, and still is, seen as a perpetual borderland, either of Poland or Russia. The first of the young writers I'm going to mention, the typically intemperate Sergei Prilutsky, is possibly referring to his native Belarusia, when he describes himself as being in a borderland province in a land of absurdity. Before turning to border literature as such, maybe worth mentioning a few of comic presentations of the relations between Belarus and its neighbours. 2 books by Władysław Achromenko and Maxim Klimkovich make clear just how difficult it has been in the past to speak of Belarusian borders at all. The first of them is Janki albo Ostatni najezd na Litwie, whose title makes clear reference to Mickiewicz, of course. This wide-ranging satirical novel depicts Belarus as little more than a battleground between 2 ruthless antagonists, neither of whom have any regard for Belarus's aspirations. When independence is finally granted, it's no more than a meaningless paper signed by Stalin and Hitler. 2 years later, another comic work by the same authors, Prawdziwa historia Kacapa, Chachla i Bulbasza, Apokryf Prowokacja, encompasses a broader national context, showing the attempts of the 3 eponymous citizens, with the addition of Poles, Czech, to establish their claims to disputed territory. As is made very clear, nobody intended to give Belarusians any kind of independence unless they took it for themselves. These conflicts and troubles are treated with entertaining bravura in both novels of Achromenko and Klimkovich, and the same may be said of a sardonically witty macaronic poem by the tragically short-lived poet Dionys Chwastowski, Three narody Chalubie, presenting 3 countries, Russia dominant of course, Belarus and Ukraine, as gays living together for centuries. Three narody Chalubie жили разом 1000 лет, жили разом и робили, и ходили в туалет. Разом спали, разом пили, в общем ладный организм. И коли хаманили, то про гомосексуализм. «Вот, — сказал старейший братик, — почему ты, брат Бульбаш, как законченный лунатик, вроде даже как не наш? Мы пахали, мы потели вместе столько тысяч лет, а теперь легли в постели, а тебя как будто нет. Или вот скажи нам, милость, нас братанище хохол, что с тобой, родной, случилось? Бродишь ночью гол как кол. Может, я чего не понял? Отвечайте, пацаны. Поклянитесь на иконы, а не то спущу штаны». И сидели, и молчали, той жених и той жених. Только Польша уже ночами больше не бегая до их. These jeux d'esprit may be regarded perhaps as comments on the prehistory of the border between Poland and Belarus that I propose to discuss briefly. This border is treated in various different ways in contemporary Belarusian literature. Arto Klino conspicuously avoids mentioning Poland as such in his Malaya Podorozhnaya Knижка по городе Солнца, an absorbing reminiscence of a child growing up in what he calls, ironically, the city of the sun in the land of happiness. Klino refers to the country on Belarus's western border simply as Europe. In another work, Shalom, the hero obtains an old Prussian helmet in Germany, which he refuses to take off, alienating by such inept and gauche behavior both his hosts in the West as well as his fellow countrymen when he returns home. Such disorientation may be considered a real part of the nature of the border between Belarus and the West. In complete contrast to the almost aggressive statement of alienation by Klino's character, some young writers see a border as a kind of symbol for a romantic meeting place. For instance, Icha Prokofiev writes in a short sketch, «Семь пудов кохания», «Амаль кожний день они зустракались на межі, докладнее межа была у любым месте ихней встречи». Tatiana Niedbaya, in her verse cycle «Життя протягується», presents a similar romantic but more detailed picture of borders. In an untitled poem from this cycle, the poet seeks salvation by being taken by her lover to the frontier, where everything is transformed by their manifest love for each other. «Забирай меня от меня и ратуй от скрухи, отдаваться солодку моцные руки, рухи там межи, праз межу, пауз межу, у помежа, где я себя не належу, и ты себе не належишь. Автомат за мешками, наливай коньяк, и зливаю до кропли опошни. И помежник, пускай без визу и без мытных сборов, опьянели от счастья нашего. Замест штампу он пишет верш на сторонках паспорта». Maria Matisevich, a prominent figure in contemporary Belarusian literature, is the author of an entertaining verse triptych entitled Pamiezhnie Historie. The first, weird, erotic, describes the experiences of a young woman whose suitcase full of female items is painstakingly searched by a young Belarusian border guard, ostensibly to find contraband such as NATO microfilms, but who, when challenged by its owner, gives up in embarrassment and goes home to his family. «Прошу вас, гражданка, проследуйте вонки, треба проверить, чи ви не зв'язані з НАТО». «Ведаю вас, лейтенанту, спочатку, аби микропленки у майтках пошукать, а потом пробач, я женатый». The second story, Transit Havenda, features a rather worldly priest hitchhiking at the border, where he's picked up by a lorry driver who soon tires of his holy passengers' philosophical attitude to administrative delays, relating the passage between the two frontier posts to the human condition as a whole. «Супокойся, 5 дён транзит, тут у свете мы все транзитом». Мне так сказал один ксьонз, я его зимку подвозил. Уявляешь, водохрест, мороз, и ксьонз стоит придорожьем. А життя, князь сказал, транзит, долгий Шлях поміж межами, и blah, blah, blah. A further continuation to this topic of borders by Maria Martisevich is her imaginative and witty introduction to Yeva Vezhnevetsy's book, Шлях дробной сволочи. In this essay, Martisevich pictures a series of visitors to the writer in her suburban house. Perhaps the most interesting and relevant of today's topics is the visit of an official from the Home Office concerned with society and migration, who tells her, «Ти летні у кожнім сказі згадуєш про кокосі, хто хоче з'їхати з, так би мовити, неутульної родини. Ці дані розходяться з офіційної статистики». The reply is immediate. Я пишу то, що бачу в очах людей. Коли я бачу в цих очах, що чоловік хоче з'їхати, я пишу об этом. Я бачила ці очі на межі, і часто буваю на межі, я сам з'їхала. Мені тебе шкода. Кожен чоловік носить свій саван з собою, сказав співпрацовник. Мені тебе так само. У неба нема кишеню, сказала Єва Вежневець. The remaining visitors are less relevant to the present theme, and I'll cut a bit further forward. In several of Vezhnevetsy's stories, the characters go to Poland, not because Poles are necessarily better than Belarusians, but in the case of two girls in the story, Wanda Klistovich, because they have a friend there who they hope will help them to settle, morally and financially. In another story, Poland is depicted as a place of escape for a member of the Belarusian National Front, persecuted by the KDB. The same story contains a vivid dream of an ideal Belarus overshadowed and ruined by black waves coming from Moscow. І тут за далекляду з'явилася перша брудна хвиля, справжній чорний вал, поползла по землі, заливаючи все. Agencia Shasi is far the most directly relevant story in this book to the theme of borders and particularly crossing them. The narrator is a Belarusian woman, Yeva, married to a Pole, who opens a dating agency for Polish men who want Belarusian brides. Unsurprisingly, the representatives of the two countries are far from love's young dream, and the two Polish men, Jacek and Jurek, seem rather like their Belarusian counterparts in their predilection for eating and drinking. Whilst both men and women require the blandishments of Yeva to overlook their would-be partner's defects, the narrator presents her mission as little short of sacred. «Жанить заход с усходом теперь справа богоуходная. Можем шить наш континент и трохи почистить мозги заходникам и усходникам». I'm cutting short to get in 2 minutes. The author may draw an unappealing picture of the men, but the girls themselves are naive and ignorant, revealing their lack of education in their muddled language and thinking, far worse than Trasyanka. One of the girls is told by the narrator bluntly that she'll be better off in the West. «Счастливі дороги на Захід, у Білорусі тебе видать, і справді добра не буде. Тут тиск, як у Мар'янській упадині. Білоруса сплющили, скривила, як камбалу. Вока вилізла на бок, тіло у блін скамечила, плавники на задницю вивернула. Але ж плазує трохи, а інші тут зовсім не виживають». Well, I think I better set a good example. I'll just say one last quotation, if I may. It's Yeva's last peroration. «Заберите наш замуж, ну заберите нас замуж. Мы будем шаровать вам спину и робить педикюр. Нам устыло жить при сквапном и злым бацку, а своего дома у нас нема». I hope with what's turned out to be rather a quantity of quotations that I've given you an idea that young Belarusian writers respond to a small corner of their country, the border, with life and imagination. Thank you.